Merde, oui, another musical genre. Hope you're ready. Like R. Kelly, I am forcing it on you. So don't go telling me white persons can do black songs. Try telling that to Eminem or Michael Jackson.
Hello, and welcome to a different kind of Wine Blast episode.
Yep.
We are talking wine in cans, but we're going to start with some comedy, because we probably all need a bit of a laugh right now, what with everything that's going on in the world.
Yeah. And providing said wit and general japery is the inimitable Marcel Lucont, an iconic character who is a legend of the comedy and cabaret scene, self-professed raconteur, bon viveur and flâneur, also accomplished musician, as we can hear from our title track, with a hairstyle and an outrageous turn of phrase to match.
Yep, so let's start proceedings with a recording of Marcel's show-stopping live performance of his poem Wine in a Can. And just a warning, if you're in any way prudish, you might want to tune out for the next couple of minutes.
Wine in a can. Wine in a can. There are some things in life I just can't understand. Is society really so far down the pan that we're actually fine with some wine in a can? Wine in a can. Wine in a can, as the vineyard grape completes its noble lifespan, to be lovingly picked by a sure, steady hand, then fucked into a tin, to be wine in a can. Can you truly say your life has gone to plan, as you swig like a pig drinking wine from a can? As our history books chart the fall of man, they'll read Nixon, then Johnson, then wine in a can. Fruit on a pizza, sandals with socks. I thought we'd hit bottom with wine in a box. But to add to the list of a cultural ban, just above Nazi banners, should be wine in a can. Sure, this is a free country, unlike Afghanistan. You can drive to a car park to make love in a van. But if that is your choosing, after afternoon cruising, while your partner is snoozing, and your thoughts turn to boozing, and you're musing upon it, wiping sperm from your bonnet. Voyeurs give you a handshake for avoiding the handbrake. When between them, they drop £3.10 in your hand. Don't degrade yourself by buying wine in a can.
It's going to be pretty hard to follow that, but follow it we must, and with Marcel's help too, because he's going to be sprinkling a little more comedy gold on this episode before we move on to the slightly more serious stuff, where we're going to be asking three key questions. Is canned wine any good? Why should we buy it, if at all? And which ones are best?
I'm not sure Marcel will be our target audience for this episode. But yep, we're going to be hearing from canned wine luminaries, including fellow Master of Wine Richard Kelly, Brixton Wine Club founder Louisa Payne, and Maurice Carr of canned wine producer Atimo.
We'll also be revealing the results of a blind taste test by two Masters of Wine. That's us.
That might be us. That might be us.
Of exactly the same wine in bottles versus cans. Mm-hmm. Can we tell the difference?
We will find out. And we will be reporting on the highlights from a mammoth tasting of 77 canned wines, giving a definitive verdict on the names to look out for in a fast developing scene.
Yeah, we'll be talking value, shelf life, convenience, carbon emissions, moderation, and if all that sounds a bit serious, don't worry. We will be asking the big questions. Is it okay to swig wine straight from the can? And is there a place for straws in this particular equation?
And talking of big questions, before we get into the serious issues on the agenda here, you wanted a bit more of a laugh, didn't you?
Yeah.
So you scheduled a morning call with Marcel Lucont to ask him just a few more questions, starting with how his Wine in a Can poem came about.
Sure, let's go there. Where to start? This was written at, I was at a festival maybe 2 years ago, a British festival, which still to me is a fascinating beast. You know, in France we do camping, we do festivals, but we do the two separately and with dignity. So every year I get asked to play these festivals, and every year there's a new atrocity, whether it's somebody, you know, the Portaloo situation, let's not even go there, or the people foraging food from trucks. But 2 years ago, backstage, I was handed something which I believe they thought was a treat, some kind of gift. And somebody gave to me some wine in a can. And immediately, after staring at them for some time, walking away, shaking their head, I went off to write a poem immediately. And that is the poem produced there.
And do you think this emotion, this reaction, this visceral reaction was entirely because you are French?
No, I think any cultured being would have responded the same. I think French or otherwise, you know. French, obviously the top of the chart in culture, but anyone with an ounce of humanity would have, I think, dealt with this the same way, I like to think.
Now, obviously, wine in a can is far more environmentally friendly than bottles. Does that not change your opinion, sway you in any way?
Sure, it's more environmentally friendly to go around wearing bark and on the body and pieces of wood on the feet, but we don't do it.
So, what is your wine of choice, Marcel?
The wine of choice for me, let's see, I will go Chateau Margaux, 84, 86, 84 I am going. I mean, currently I'm drinking a little Beaujolais, little breakfast wine.
And how's that going down?
Roche de Belen, wonderful. It's about 10 in the morning, perfect time for the Beaujolais, wonderful breakfast wine.
So your wine of choice very much depends on the occasion, on the time of day, on who you're with.
The occasion, yeah, I'm going for a light one this morning. I have a lot to get done, so, you know, it's light Beaujolais today.
And what do you tend to drink on stage? Because it is your signature move, you know, to having a glass of vin rouge on stage.
Yeah, I try and pair the wine to the audience. So, you know, if I'm in France, I may, you know, I will go for more refined. I will go for, you know, a nice full-bodied. I will maybe go, let's see, a Bordeaux. Let's see, no, a French Malbec, I would say. A French Malbec, just to celebrate that French grape that the Argentinians have stolen and abused. And the English audience, you know, I will it's less refined, I would say. For an English audience, I will go with something a little more rough and ready.
So which audience, if any, would provoke you to drink wine from a can?
I would have to be in a very bad place for that to occur.
And seeing as we're on the topic, what about English wine? Have you sampled any of those delights?
I've never seen it myself. I'm told it exists, but I will believe it when I see it. It just sounds wrong. You compare the two sentences, bottled in Bordeaux, bottled in Bradford. You know, they both work as sentences, of course, you know. The French one relates to wine. Bradford one, hospitalization. But, you know, yeah, it just sounds wrong.
Marcel, final question. What would be your general wine advice to our listeners?
General wine advice. Get to know it like a lover. Treat it well like a lover and it will treat you well. You know, you cannot be with it all of the time. You know, wine is your companion, but you have to get to know it. You have to know it inside and out. And every now and again, you have to just, you know, smash it.
Wise words. Marcel Lucont, thank you very much indeed.
De rien.
Now, I'm not sure how clear it is from the audio there, but I was finding it very hard not to absolutely dissolve in laughter. And this is actually a much shortened version of our conversation as well, because, we touched on things like mulled wine, the Great British Pub Quiz, mild cheddar, and Napoleon.
Well, we have been considering putting out some of our best interviews as standalone shows, so perhaps this is one for the upcoming archive.
Actually, that's a really good idea. Yeah. Let's do that.
Yeah,
Let's do that.
I mean, it is a genuinely hilarious interview, I have to say. I think there was one quote, wasn't there, that went something along the lines of, "If you're eating mild cheddar, you've given up on life." And it sounded a lot better in a French accent, of course, which I'm not going to attempt.
Well, doesn't everything. And we should say, go and see Marcel in his Cabaret Fantastique residency at the Crazy Cocks in Soho, or watch his Wine List touring show. Wine List, that's WHINE, Wine List touring show. Or tune into the Wine List podcast as well. You can find it all on marcellucont.com. The man is a living comedy legend.
He is indeed. Now, we do need to get serious at some stage in this show, and that moment has probably come. So we've introduced the theme of wines in cans from one perspective. Shall we try to add a bit more nuance to the debate?
I think that would be a very good idea. So we're not going to get too geeky. We all know cans, more typically perhaps for beer or soft drinks, but also these days, water and yes, wine. Now we covered canned wine in our WTAF episode a few years back. Check it out. It will also explain the acronym. Might not be what you're thinking. We were talking there to a bunch of forward-thinking people putting quality wines into alternative formats, which are becoming more and more popular as an alternative to glass bottles. The issue with glass bottles is that they're typically the biggest part of a wine producer or retailer's carbon footprint, being energy intensive to manufacture and recycle, also heavy to ship.
Yeah, so wine producers are very sensibly looking for alternative ways to package their wines, and cans is a category that seems to have built up serious momentum, particularly since lockdown, when glass shortages and a desire to experiment and sample wine led to a mini boom in cans. Such has been the success of canned wines that a recent Decanter headline asked, "Have we reached peak can?"
No, would be our short answer. Just a quick glance at the market data shows a category in eye-catching growth. Sales of wine in cans in the US, the leading market for cans, rose from $2 million in 2012 to $69 million in 2018. That's, more than 30 times, as cited in Wine Spectator. Multiple studies identify canned wines as one of the fastest growing categories in global wine markets. And according to GMI, we'll put a link to this on our show notes, the global canned wine market was worth $1.4 billion in 2024, and it's scheduled for compound growth of more than 12% to reach $4.6 billion by 2034.
Yep. Now we'll come on to the reasons behind the growing popularity of canned wine in due course. But it's telling to see the emergence of two major canned wine competitions on either side of the Atlantic. Plus, British supermarket Waitrose swapped all their small glass bottle formats to cans back in 2023 in a move to save them. They said the idea was to save them 320 million tonnes of packaging and to significantly reduce their carbon footprint.
A contact at Waitrose told us the canned wine category is gaining traction, especially with the global rise in canned beverage sales post-COVID. This growth is primarily driven by consumer benefits like convenience, portability, quick chilling, easy recycling. Government initiatives to penalise heavier glass alternatives will likely make lightweight formats even more appealing. Regarding quality, canned wines can be excellent, especially with careful wine selection, proper handling and packaging, and the right can size and liner.
So, just to touch on the can and liner briefly, we've been trawling our way through several technical reports on cans, which are actually fascinating, a teeny bit nerdy. But just to summarise, a can is essentially made up of an aluminium or aluminium alloy structure and a lacquer or liner, typically made from solvent and resins, which separates the liquid from the metal. Wine isn't the easiest liquid to keep in a can because it's acidic, and contains the preservatives sulfur dioxide, or SO2, which can react with the metal to produce stinky sulfides, which smell like rotten eggs.
But wine producers are getting better at managing this risk using thicker liners, for example, and carefully managing both sulfur dioxide, SO2, copper and chloride levels in the wines destined for cans. They're also aware of the grape varieties and styles, which can be more at risk of this reduction, like Sauvignon Blanc and Syrah, and they plan accordingly. And I have to say, from our tasting of 77 canned wines, almost none were faulty in this way, were they?
Okay, so I think that's good by way of initial primer. Let's now bring in Richard Kelly, MW, of British wine importer Dreyfus Ashby, and someone who's been banging the drum for cans longer than most. He's behind the Liberator brand, and also sources the canned wines for Banks Brothers, the Yorkshire duo, who describe themselves as restaurateurs by day and wine fanatics by night.
They sound like bona fide Marvel superheroes, don't they?
I think they are.
That's something I aspire to do. Anyway, I started by asking Richard, why cans?
I always say it's down to two things, which is basically convenience and the environmental values. Let's take the environmental issues first. So aluminium is obviously an ore. It comes out of the ground, but it's considerably more recyclable than glass is. If you take one of these cans and you empty it, it weighs 36 grams. If you take a standard bottle of wine, it's about 360 grams. So you can just do the maths as to the space saving there alone. So we are currently canning wines in South Africa. And when I ship a pallet of wine in standard 75 centilitre bottles, it is 672 bottles on a pallet. That's about 500 litres of wine. On the same pallet, if it's in cans, I can get nearly 1,000 litres on the same pallet.
So twice the capacity.
Twice the capacity, purely because it's not about the weight necessarily. It's about the space. The cans are so much more compact, and they obviously weigh considerably less. So that just brings obviously our shipping costs down, and we look towards passing that over to the end consumer.
So it's actually, you end up getting better value, better bang for your buck.
Yes, yeah. I mean, we've done a wine in can and in bottle. The bottle's £20 retail. The 3 cans, £18. So yes, it makes complete sense. And aluminium. It's like glass. It's an inert vessel. So there is no reason why anybody should view cans differently to buying wine in a glass. So the fact is, you can open a can. We often open a can at home because we just want a glass of wine, and it's the perfect size. It's 25 centilitres. It's 2 decent glasses of wine, and it just works. My biggest concern with the category is that, a bit like bag-in-box was in the 1980s, that people just perceive the wines as the wine quality not being very good. We're not trying to pioneer wine in cans per se, but we're trying to prove that you can put just as good a wine in a can as you can in a bottle, and trying to get that message through. So my biggest concern is that a lot of the cans that I've seen to date, the packaging might be quite fancy, but the intrinsics are not great. And as far as I'm concerned, there's no excuse for canning inferior wine, because the wine itself is probably the smallest component part of the cost of canning. So there's no excuse for putting bad wine in a can.
So great wine can come in a can?
Yes, I think so.
I mean, is there any barrier, for example, to putting Chateau Margaux in a can?
No, I can't see any reason why not.
But what do you say to people to persuade them? They're maybe more traditionalists. They're used to having their wine out of a 75 centilitre bottle. What do you say to people to win them over, to get them to at least dip their toe in the water with cans? I mean,
what I do say to them is there is nothing different in terms of the format. I mean, it's let's say an inert vessel. I think the most important thing is just to get people to try it. I'm connected with the Banks Brothers cans up in Yorkshire with people like James and Tommy Banks, and in the early days of them trialing the wines, you go to the Black Swan, you basically have the degustation menu because that's the only choice, and most people take the wine package. And their staff is so well trained, they'll come and they'll pour the wine for you. They'll tell you about it. They'll tell you the winemaker's dog's name if you want to know that. And then all of a sudden, halfway through your meal, there's a can of Chardonnay dropped on your table, and I've seen this happen firsthand, and just the reaction on people's faces. That on a white tablecloth one-star Michelin restaurant, you've got a can in front of you, and the reaction is incredible. What I would say is, again, speaking to somebody like James and Tommy, they would say that the people who have experienced that, and they've probably been the most adversary to actually tasting the wine out of a can on the table, have been actually the most people who've been convinced the most to go away to tell their friends that actually it's probably a good idea.
So it's another kind of discovery.
Yeah, and it's always interesting to the circumstances of taking a can of this and sipping it directly from a can, and then obviously putting it into a decent wine glass and trying it that way, because the impression you get is always going to be very different.
Well, I have to ask you that, as a master of wine, I don't presume you're going home, cracking one of these tins and just swinging it straight from the tin.
I have been known. Not necessarily the red, but Albarino or the sparkling one, or the bubbles do up your nose a bit. No, there's no reason why you shouldn't do it.
So you can drink it straight from the can. This is Master of Wine sanctioned behaviour.
Yes.
You can drink it from the can
Absolutely.
if you're thirsty enough.
Well, if you're outside an event, like on a nice rainy day like today, you've probably already been prohibited from taking a glass in there anyway. Right. So, what else do you do? Unless you've got a paper cup or
I was going to say, is there any alternative that you would recommend, if you find yourself...
A straw?
A straw. Oh, I love this. So you can properly savour the taste experience with a straw. Is that right? Maybe we'll go down there. Richard, thank you very much indeed.
You're welcome.
Where to start with all that? I suppose the obvious one is the scandalous notion of an MW sanctioning the drinking of wine straight from a can, or perhaps even worse, from a can via a straw.
Scandalous, isn't it? Absolutely scandalous. And that story about people being shocked to have a can of Chardonnay plonked on their table in a Michelin-starred restaurant. But, actually then becoming converts as a result. And we can definitely empathise, can't we? Because, we tried that Chardonnay and we were converted after trying it. It was a Chardonnay from Newton Johnson in South Africa. We recommended it in our WTAF episode. Absolutely sensational wine.
And this is the key, the key thing that Richard is driving at, isn't it? Yeah. There's no excuse for putting bad wine in a can. Great wine can come in a can. Chateau Margaux could come in a can. It's just a case of proving that these wines really can be high quality and getting enough people to back the category.
Yeah, and both the Banks Brothers and Liberator wines are really impressive. We'll come on to that in a bit. But, I did just want to pick up on the sustainability theme Richard touched on when he mentioned aluminium mining. Now, obviously, that mining does come at an environmental cost, and it's energy intensive to make cans. That said, it's estimated that 75% of all the aluminium ever produced is still in circulation today, and recycling aluminium cans takes 95% less energy than making new ones, apparently. Cans also have some of the highest recycling rates of all packaging. In the US, it's around 50%, and in Germany, up to 90%. And that's according to Global Growth Insights.
So you also asked Richard about shelf life. He explained it's a bit of an unknown and depends on the wine and the can. But he started doing cans in 2020 in South Africa during COVID. And the first Chenin Blanc he canned then, in his words, is tasting as good now as it did when it first went into can.
Yeah, I think the idea with cans is not to keep them too long. Most people say 2 years is a standard shelf life for cans, which isn't bad, but, but I have to say, we have also tasted wines 5 years old from cans that have been perfectly pristine.
Right. On that pristine note, I think it's time to take a break before we hear some more expert views and share the results of our canned wine mega tasting. To recap so far, wine in a can is not without its detractors, comedic or otherwise. But make no mistake, this is a category with the wind in its sails, growing fast on the back of its convenience, sustainable credentials, and let's face it, for just being pretty cool. You can even, whisper it, use a straw.
Sacre Bleu! Ah! Quelle horreur. Okay, so next up, we get to hear from Louisa Payne, founder of the Brixton Wine Club. Now, this originally started out as a wine tasting club in Louisa's flat, after all the other wine clubs looked a bit too steady for her, apparently. And then during COVID, morphed into a canned wine retailer and subscription club.
Now, intriguingly, Louisa has a background in fashion, where her job was predicting what we were all going to be wearing next. So is her canned wine business a sign of what we're all going to be drinking next?
I asked Louisa to tell us about the wider benefits of cans for wine.
So I think the thing that people don't realise with the wine industry is that the majority of the emissions from the industry come from transportation of glass bottles. And I think with cans, they're so lightweight, especially when they're empty as well. They're a matter of like grams. So super lightweight to transport. I also just love that it means that you can try a different grape variety without committing to an entire bottle. Helps with the moderate drinking trend. So yeah, those are my top three, I think. It's environmental, moderation, and then kind of the ability to trial different wines.
Yeah, I mean, how important is the functionality of cans, literally being able to pick it up, take it wherever, and, just that sort of ease of use?
Yeah, I mean, that is obviously one of the huge benefits too, is that you can take them anywhere. They're ready to go whenever you need. You don't need a glass necessarily. You don't need a corkscrew. There's no kind of fancy wine apparatus needed to enjoy them. No decanters, anything like that. You just kind of crack the can open and you're ready to go wherever and whenever.
So you're okay just drinking it straight from the can, are you?
You can. I would always recommend that you pour it out. People often ask me that, do I drink it straight from the can? And sometimes I'll say to the back in jest, I'm like, would you drink wine straight from the bottle? And I'm like, you can, but you probably wouldn't. I think part of the enjoyment with wine is kind of seeing the colour of it in the glass, swirling it around, like being able to release the aromas. And that's not something you can do just drinking it straight from the can, but that option is available.
Can you quantify how much better cans, and do you quantify how much better cans are than bottles when it comes to things like carbon emissions and recycling?
Yes, cans generate 190 grams of CO2 per litre of wine, whereas standard glass bottles generate 525 grams of CO2 per litre. So it is quite there are some good stats out there already that show this. And I think it's generally alternative formats on the whole, such as cans, bag-in-box and paper bottles, can cut carbon emissions by up to 7 times that of a glass bottle.
Mm. Is it generally a younger crowd who you tend to sell to?
It's a mixture. I think it depends what they're buying it for, but my main audience is up to 45 years of age. So I think generally it is the younger kind of crowd. And I think that younger generation are actually used to everything being in cans now. Like we drink canned water, everything comes in a tin. And I think they're so much more kind of predisposed to trying that versus some people that would look at it and say, I will never try wine in a can. But they probably drink like Coca-Cola, like water and beer and don't think anything of it from a can.
So what do you say to persuade those people, maybe those skeptics who are used to buying their wine in 75 centilitre glass bottles? How do you win over the traditionalists?
Well, so my trump card, I would say, for that is even in a blind taste test against wines from all different formats, a master of wine couldn't pinpoint the wines in that, like what format they'd come from. And so you can test this theory for me as well. But that was always the one of just saying, even someone that is, top tier, like highest kind of knowledge level, they couldn't tell in this taste test.
Is it hard battling against maybe the perception that great wine doesn't tend to come in a can?
It is hard. And I think it can be trickier because we are online. So we can't always get right in front of people and get them to try it straight away. Whilst I've been doing Brixton Wine Club, as a side note, I've also been running a wine on tap mobile wine bar that goes to like festivals and things. So I'm very used to people questioning the format. So that would be wine in kegs that comes in 20 or 30 litre kegs. And they always look and go, oh my God, like, is that going to actually be nice? And I can just give them a sample and say, try it, let me know what you think. And, you get that instant kind of, they go, oh, that's fine. I'm like, yeah, it's great. It's so funny, like, people look at beer taps and they'll, that's a sign of quality, right? You go, oh, it's on tap, I'm going to have that. It's like tap, then it's bottle, then it's can. I feel like in the beer kind of way you look at that. But for wine, it's like bottle and then everything else is kind of And actually, I think, obviously wine is made in cask, and also huge stainless steel tanks, which arguably could just be an enormous can.
I love that thought. I love that thought. And sometimes these wines, when you sort of scale the can size up to a 75 centilitre price, which is what we tend to use as a judge of price, these wines in cans can be quite pricey. How does that sit with people buying them?
I mean, it's a good question. And I think, most of them do end up sitting around the £20 a bottle sort of mark, because our average price, I'd say, is between £5.50 and £6 a can. So yeah, it does. It's definitely more expensive than anything you'd get on a Tesco club card deal, and it doesn't compare with what you can get in the supermarket, but it's not supposed to do the exact same job. So I think the producers coming into this space, or the brands coming into this space, really know that. I think there's a bit of a conception of canned wine being bad quality, like when it was screw top versus cork. This whole thing. I think they know they're taking on something that has got a bit of a bump to get people into, and so I think they want to really subvert that by being like, this is really good wine we're putting in here, and give people that reason to try it, and like it's not like absolute plonk, it's not going to be £5 a bottle sort of thing. These are £5 a can.
Louisa, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. It's been so nice to talk about my favourite subject.
I love that idea that wine is frequently made in big versions of cans, like stainless steel tanks or big vats. Yeah. So why should we get our knickers in a twist about selling it in small cans?
Yeah, exactly. I wonder how much a stainless steel tank of wine would cost. Actually, no, so not going to get on that rabbit hole. But no, it was interesting what she said about price too, wasn't it? Again, sort of echoing Richard Kelly in that there's clearly a big movement to put quality wines into cans now, rather than perhaps the, at best, serviceable sort of train station fare before. So they can work out quite pricey, but equally, 10 to 20 quid. But even so, it's not
still
crazy.
Value for money, isn't it?
You can get value.
Yeah. And she actually also sent over some more stats on the sustainability front, citing a Systembolaget study that said switching to 3 250 millilitre aluminium cans, i.e. 750 millilitres in total, like a bottle, cuts 79% of the carbon emissions that would be produced by that bottle.
I also asked Louisa about the future. She said a couple of things. Firstly, social media like Instagram and TikTok are key for building trust and awareness for her. And secondly, she was just back from Wine Paris, the big show, and her take was that, as global wine consumption is going down and drinking habits are changing, producers are looking for kind of new and innovative ways to re-engage with customers, particularly young ones. And cans are a real opportunity in that sense. So, she's predicting a lot more canned wine coming onto the market.
Yeah, I mean, she also said she'd like to see canned wine being taken more seriously by retailers and not just stocked in the convenience section, but put on shelves alongside normal bottled wine, which sounds sensible.
Yeah.
And not just that. She also laid down a challenge to us, did she not? Could we tell the difference between the same wine from a can and a bottle?
I thought you were never going to ask. She did indeed slap us with a silk glove. So we gladly accepted her challenge and sat down with 2 different red wines, one Italian, one South African. In both cases, it was exactly the same wine. The only difference that one had been put into a can and the other one came in a bottle.
So what were the results? Drum roll, please.
Right, we have just done a direct can versus bottle wine taste test. Susie Barry, Master of Wine, over to you.
Okay, well, the bottom line is the difference is negligible if indeed there is a difference really at all.
Yes.
We used 2 red wines, so we've got an Old World wine, a New World wine, both in the can and bottle. And what do we think? Well,
yeah, I mean, so why don't we go through it? So the first wine, I'll throw this over to you. Why don't you do the first wine?
Yeah.
These South African.
South African. So this is the Liberator, and it's a Cabernet Sauvignon Shiraz blend, and it is known as New Blood and Chocolate. It was the 2020 vintage. So you've got a wine here that's quite rich. It's definitely New World, but. And when you look at the 2 wines, the can definitely looks a little bit younger. And when you taste them, it tastes a little bit younger, but it's marginal. And if you weren't tasting both wines, you, at the same time, you would never know.
Yeah, and it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because I guess because it's 2020, it's actually had time to evolve in the packaging.
Yes.
So it's evolved in the bottle, hasn't evolved so much
in the can, which makes sense.
Which
we wouldn't
absolutely
have
makes
expected
sense.
It to
but neither
evolve
is worse or better necessarily, just very slightly different.
Slightly different.
And you wouldn't often be able to taste that old wine in a can. So quite interesting in that sense that the can hasn't fallen down at all.
At all, not at all. So we're talking 25 years in the can and it's actually tasting delicious.
Well, maybe if it spent some time in barrel, maybe slightly less in the actual packaging.
Less,
but even so, significant time, really interesting, but no degradation in the can.
No.
Then the old world red was the Terre di Faiano Primitivo from Italy. This one's 2023 Puglia. And again, for me, I couldn't tell the difference here between the can and the bottle, and maybe because it's a more youthful vintage, it hasn't had so long in the packaging, which I guess is what you would suppose that would be. You know, the idea of cans is that they're quite quick turnover so you would drink them quite soon. Yeah. For me, really very, very negligible difference, and just two delicious wines in different
exactly
formats.
Yeah, I mean, it just shows you how you can drink either wine from a can or a bottle and you're still going to have a great experience.
There we go.
Okay, so proof that cans don't necessarily mean inferior quality or mean the wine is really any different to how it would be in a bottle.
Yeah.
Now, will this be true in absolutely every case? Maybe not. For example, after this, we also tried a Tiki Ridge Sauvignon Blanc from Marlborough in New Zealand, and there was a difference. The can was just a little bit more muted and less vibrant than the bottle, wasn't it? But we have to say this, we're not 100% sure it was definitely the same vintage. You know, the bottle was 2023, the can didn't state a vintage. No. And in any case, it wasn't as if the can was poor quality, it was just a little bit different from the bottle.
Yeah, and equally, you know, sometimes you can taste two bottles of the same wine and they're different. So, you know, I guess the key message is cans, if done well, should not make any appreciable difference to your wine than bottles, especially in the short term, and even I guess as we tasted in the medium term, given that red South African wine was 2020, so 5 years old.
Yeah.
You know, in short, you can trust cans. You know, there's no reason to be scared of them. You know, we would definitely not agree, for example, as one wine writer recently put it, that the flavours skew tinny. You know, that's a myth.
Okay, so before we get into our mega tasting, let's hear from Maurice Carr of Attimo, the Italian canned wine brand. Maurice is originally from the UK, but set up what he calls a craft winery with a friend in northeast Italy. In his words, they stumbled across cans during COVID when they wanted to send samples to the UK, but there was a global glass shortage. After realising how well cans worked for wine, Maurice says, we never looked back.
He notes how the markets are evolving. You know, the US and the UK are big markets for wine in cans, but now he sees Scandinavia and Northern Europe, even France and Spain, starting to show potential, partly led by the example of ready-to-drink cocktails and craft beer.
So I asked Maurice what his target market is.
It's really millennials, so late 20s to late 30s, essentially. The reason is I know them very well, being a millennial myself. I also feel that the market, there's not really any companies or brands really responding to the wants or needs of the new drinker. I think the beer market, the beer sector have done this extremely well. I think the spirits have done it extremely well. I think the wine sector is still lagging behind in that. Cans are a big way to promote this because, you know, you can drink in moderation. I think the tendency of younger consumers is to drink less. So having just one can, enjoying one glass, it's aligned with the wants and needs of younger consumers. Linked to occasions, people like to spend time with friends. I think this has been pushed a lot by COVID, spending time in nature, hiking, going to the beach, traveling. And this is something which, you know, you can throw in the bag, go on a train, go hiking, go camping, rather than having a bottle as well, which can easily with breakages and you need a corkscrew. It's just a lot handier. And also to be more the experience and have to be more experimental. They want to, that age group, discover new varieties. They want authenticity. They want to see where a product actually comes from. and they place a lot of importance as well on sustainability. So it needs to be a product which is aligned also with their values. And I think that's something we're trying to do. And I don't really see that in the market at the moment, not 100%.
And how do you see the future for canned wines?
I think it will grow. I think it's already seen extremely good growth, and I think that will continue. I think with people, it's more of a mental block, but I think as people realize the advantages of canned wines, the perception you can have good quality, and that's where we want to come in with Atomo and show you can have good quality wine in a can. I think people will start to change. Trends, consumption trends are changing, so people are drinking in moderation. And, people always want to go home, long, hard day at work, and just enjoy a glass of wine. And I think that's where cans can really come in that part.
Maurice, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Interesting that COVID link that runs across many canned wine operations, isn't it? If you look at the data, the growth was there before, but maybe that just kind of supercharged the whole thing.
Yeah. And maybe younger consumers are leading the way, as Maurice says. Perhaps we more mature folk have a thing or two to learn from them.
As ever.
On which note, we tasted 77 different wines from cans, and we have the photos to prove it.
Yes.
I think this must be one of the biggest tastings of its kind. What was our verdict?
Excited, occasionally disappointed, but mainly excited. I think it's clear there are still some wines in cans which are not good. They never were. And they're just style over substance and are just not worth the money. But it's equally clear that some people are taking this extremely seriously, putting outstanding wines in cans. And that's very exciting.
Yeah, there is a very clear divide between the good stuff and the bad, isn't there?
Yeah, yes.
So we have a full listing of our favourites on our website show notes. But by way of headlines from the tasting, who would you say is doing a good job with wines in cans?
Okay, so I'd name check Banks Brothers. Some of their wines are truly outstanding. We've mentioned their epic South African Chardonnay, which is sadly now sold out. But, they have a superb oaked Grenache Blanc from Four Paardenburg, made by Chris Williams of the Foundry. Just superb if you want a sort of savoury, complex, dry white wine. Also, they've got a lovely, luscious, late harvest Chenin from France, and a really fun kind of opulent Merlot from Parle, made by Johnny Calitz at Glencarlu. By way of counter-argument, I would add that they're not cheap. They're around £7 a can, so that works out about 21 quid a bottle. Plus, some of their batches are tasting a bit old now, I would say that. But, what they've done is they've put down a marker. They have shown what can be done in terms of quality wine in a can. And that's huge. What about you? What would you say?
Yeah, so I'd give a shout out to the Canned Wine Company. They do a superb Austrian Grüner Veltliner, a classic Southern French Grenache Rosé, and then a wonderfully crunchy Touraine Gamay. They look pretty smart, though I can't say I'm a massive fan of the design and colour scheme. There are better out there. There are some amazing designs of cans.
I have to say, I actually really quite like them. I think they're quite smart, and they've got that lovely tactile, touch.
Yeah.
So for me, they're quite smart.
Yeah.
But I get you.
It's not my favourite, but there are some good
wines,
and then some bad,
wines.
but they're very good wines. But moving on, I'd also cite When in Rome as a reliable and good value brand doing really excellent things with Italian wines.
Yeah, absolutely. We've mentioned them before, but I think it's worth giving Waitrose credit. As a major retailer backing this category, their Terra di Faiano Primitivo and Lubanzi Chenin Blanc, really solid wines in cans. Actually, really good value at about $3.65, $3.75 a can. And we did like the Mirabeau Pret-a-Porter Rosé too, which is also $3.65, again, good value. Also sold by Tesco and Sainsbury's and other major retailers. I think it would be good to see more major retailers championing cans, actually.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd also mention Vin Can as a smaller UK retailer with a really good range of cans. Brothers Simon and James Hawkins run Vin Can. They do things like the uber cool De Juice brand. We really like their Knit Naus Juicy Red.
Yeah, a bit crazy, that one.
And then also Les Vins de Vicky, Aux Joies Fleuries was lovely as well,
Really
wasn't
nice.
it?
And I know I've mentioned Banks Brothers, but I'd also give a shout out to Richard Kelly's Liberator wines in cans. Things like his Coq, and I'm going to say this very quickly and move on, Coq and Boule Perlet wine from Robertson. It's essentially just lovely oak Chardonnay with bubbles. I absolutely loved it. You weren't quite so keen, but I just thought it was glorious.
But you liked it.
And then the heartwarming reds like New Blood and Chocolate Cabernet Shiraz, and the All the Wounded Creatures Malbec. He sent a photo of that from his hotel room recently.
Yeah. No, those reds were great, weren't they?
Yeah.
And seeing as you've had a final shout out, I'll also give a mention in the more kind of natural, if you like, category to the Hands Off brand. Their German Pearl Vine, low intervention German Riesling, and Spanish Orange Garnacha Blanca were definitely impressive in that context.
Yeah. You know, as for sort of wider conclusions, I think it's clear decent wines can survive the test of time in cans. Equally, though, you know, it's a bit concerning tasting some of the older stuff. Sometimes it's past its best because you're thinking, you know, are these wines not selling through properly?
I guess it's a bit chicken and egg, isn't it? You know, it'll take time for awareness and acceptance to take off, but you need proof of concept before it does.
Yeah, that's it.
But yeah, while the good wines aren't exactly falling over, ideally you do want to be drinking something not too old, I would say, from a can.
Yeah. Another thing that's not always easy to find is information on cans. You know, it's a particular bugbear of mine that you get loads of kind of zany, cool slogans and commentary plastered all over the can.
I quite like that.
But there's a total lack of helpful information, like a vintage or origin or canny date. Maybe I'm showing my age.
About that?
Maybe
Who
I'm being
cares?
so grumpy and pedantic, but that's just me. I'm sorry.
It's the surprise.
So I'm going to say well done to Banks Brothers, Miss Vicky, the Liberator and Can Wine Company in that regard. Good info there. And a good tip here is that sometimes there is helpful information printed, but it's on the bottom of the can, which isn't always obvious at first, but do take a look at that. Stop laughing at me.
When we were
Stop
tasting that,
Look,
I've got this image of you with a can up in the air, desperately trying to read the bottom
pouring
of the can.
some of it on me in the process. Yeah.
Now, in terms of price, the good wines don't usually work out as cheap, sometimes up to the equivalent of around £20 a bottle retail, but there are some decent value options, and when canned wine is good, it's usually worth the money. You know,
yes.
As Richard Kelly said, the savings on shipping costs can help with the value proposition. Anecdotally, we've had feedback also from some operators who have actually quit the canned wine business, saying it's hard establishing canned wine brands without the backup of a bottled brand, partly because they're not necessarily, as we've said, a cheap purchase, and it can be a bit of a leap of faith for people to buy into them. But it does seem as if the tide is turning.
It does. And, you know, it's always hard to make predictions, but I can easily see this format growing and growing. You know, we've recently heard of a new can shaped like a bottle, haven't we? How's about that for going a bit meta? You know, who knows where this will all lead? Well done. But there definitely seems to be momentum, doesn't there?
Yeah. Okay. So shall we just recap on our three big questions?
Yeah.
Firstly, is canned wine any good?
Yes, it absolutely can be delicious. Sorry, I saw your pun and I thought I'm just going to go. I'm going to plumb those depths anyway. But no, it can be delicious. You know, it's not always, but when it's good, people. You know, some wine purists turn up their nose at wine in a can. You know, one sommelier is quoted as saying, "Drinking canned wine is like drinking out of a trash can." But we completely disagree. You know, we definitely champion good canned wine, maybe with a decent glass to hand. It is, to be fair. It makes wine more accessible. It makes wine more convenient, more fun, frankly. So cans are definitely part of wine's future. They're not the whole future, but they're definitely going to be a significant part of it. So what about, second question, why should we buy them, if at all?
Yeah, we definitely should look to buy wine in cans as part of a healthy wine shopping basket. You know, bottles are still best for things like champagne and fine wines to age or ogle. Bag in boxes for staple favourites you want to have in volume, or for wine bars. But for trying new things, for moderation, for convenience, sometimes for value, for doing the right thing in terms of carbon emissions, even for looking cool, cans are great. So what about our last one? Which cans do you buy?
Well, I think we've just covered that, really, haven't we? But as you said, you know, we'll put a full listing of our favourites on our website show notes. Do check those out, and you know, if you haven't already, crack open a can or two and make up your own mind, and let us know how you get on.
Just don't take your can to a Marcel Lucont show. Or even worse, give him canned wine as a gift.
No, don't do that.
On which note, huge thanks to our interviewees Marcel Lucont, Richard Kelly, Louisa Payne and Maurice Carr. If you've enjoyed this show, which has been a really fun one to make, please do recommend this podcast to your like-minded family, friends and colleagues. We'd really appreciate it.
Yeah, we'll put a bunch of resources, including links to studies we've cited, in our show notes. We'll also put up a fabulous video of Marcel's wine in a can performance. It's well worth seeing it on screen as well as listening to it. Here's to that Margot 84 in a can. Thanks so much for listening. Until next time, santé.
Mais oui.